So welcome everyone. That's the 6th episode of Princeton Startup TV. I'm Arman, and today on the program we have Ryan Bubinski, co-founder of Codecademy. He has a biophysics and computer science degree from Columbia University, and he is also YCombinator alumni. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
So it's really fascinating to interview yet another YC company. We had David Limp on the program from Bump, class of 2009. We had Adam Goldstein from Hipmonk, class of 2010. Now we have fresh batch, class of 2011, which is Codecademy. Let's start off with asking, what is Codecademy?
Sure. Codecademy is an online education platform that teaches how to program.
Cool. So currently you have one course, which is JavaScript course, but I'm sure you extending it to having more courses, more and more courses. Is it?
Yes, we have one language that we support right now, JavaScript, which we have multiple courses that teach the introductory basics of the language, and that build towards projects of ever-increasing complexity. So we want to teach a kind of applied context to programming. We're starting with JavaScript, but we are working on expanding to other languages right now. So
currently it works as an interpreter, and so I can just follow the directions on the site. It asks me, please type print hello world, and then I'm doing what it's asking. It's code interpreter plus the kind of human advice, or like human instruction as well, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We want to create an interactive educational experience where we remove all the barriers to getting started with programming. That includes setting up your environment and figuring out where to start, and guide users through that onboarding experience to learning how to program with these interactive lessons where we first give educational content and instruction and then have the user code, and this repeats multiple times with ever-increasing concepts.
Right. So I noticed you also guys use some game dynamics. So there are badges, there are achievements, there are points I get for hitting some certain milestones. How does it affect the engagement?
So we want to make sure that the learning experience is fun and engaging, and that means that students are not learning by themselves in isolation, that they're being rewarded for their achievements as they learn and move through the content, and that they can share those achievements with their friends and other people who are either learning themselves or interested in the student's progress. And so game mechanics have been, I think, a very important part of our success, and have been a largely motivating feature for our users.
Is there any plan for crowdsourced lesson creation? Content created by users in terms of like new courses?
Yes, there is.
Okay. What about your YC experience? Okay,
yes.
You're laughing, so I guess that's not the question we need to be asking. But,
oh, no.
Let's talk about YC experience.
Yes.
Everyone wants to be a YC fellow now, but it's only 2% or 2 or 3% get in. What was it like to be accepted? Did you guys have the initial version of the product by the time you applied?
We applied with a variation of the product that we came out of YC with, and it was philosophically consistent with this idea of how to match skills to jobs in the marketplace, but we took a very different approach. And during the YC experience, which was it was incredible in that it's very humbling to be part of the teams that are accepted each batch, and to see the level of talent and dedication and just all around excellence that the program attracts. We moved through various iterations of our idea and actually hit upon Codecademy at the end of that.
So what it ended up presenting in August 2011 at the Demo Day was the initial version of Codecademy, right?
That was the very first iteration of the Codecademy product, right. Which was our first attempt at creating an interactive educational product.
Right. And when was the private launch? Like on Hacker News? Was it afterwards, or?
The product launch?
The private kind of beta launch for like Show HN kind of post on Hacker News. Did it happen?
What was the launch process?
When did it happen, and what steps led to the post?
We launched on Hacker News as a simple Show HN. This wasn't meant to be a public coming out party so much as it was us asking the community, the Hacker News community, for feedback on the product. And the reception was overwhelmingly positive. and then in turn became somewhat of a public launch. And that was, I believe, about a week before demo day.
Oh, really?
And so we were hoping to just get some quick feedback that would help us improve the product before we publicly launched it. But it did kind of turn into a much larger event, which was very exciting to see.
Very cool. And Eric Ries really popularized this idea of minimal viable product and having it build, measure, learn, put it out there as quickly as possible. If you're not embarrassed by your first launch, you launch too late, all these things.
Yeah.
Are you a proponent of this feature of agile development?
I would say that it's a valuable way to approach the iteration process necessary to find, product market fit, or whatever phrase you want to use, to make sure that you're actually building something that people want. That's very much Y Combinator's ethos, or core philosophy, is that at the end of the day you have to be building a product that people want. And I think one of the best ways of figuring out if you're building a product that people want, or how you need to change your product so that people want it, is to always be launching and always be learning from your launch, and then taking what you've learned and iterating on your next cycle. And the faster that's happening, the faster you're launching, the faster you're learning, the faster you can converge upon a product that people actually want.
How do you balance it with contrast opinion of people saying that we need to build something of really high quality, which transfers the vision of a product? So, because if we put it out there, which is really not our, ultimate vision, something of a lower quality, but something out there, this will kind of worsen the first experience, the first impression, and users would end up not coming back again.
Yeah.
There's a fear between aspiring entrepreneurs, between aspiring startup founders, of this happening. How do you deal with this?
Well, of course there's a fear. It's your baby, right? It's your product, and you're emotionally attached to it, and you're personally attached to it. I think there's some merit to the idea that you would be committing a marketing error, right? To brand your product and launch it before it's ready, and to build an incorrect vision in the mind of your customers of what the product will become, or what you hope for it to become. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to focus on branding and marketing as you're launching early on, or as you're just starting to open up your product to an ever-increasing audience. So it is a fine balance between making sure that you're getting your product out in front of users. At the same time, you don't want to be establishing, I think, your brand identity until you've codified what it is that your product is, what it is that your brand stands for, what it embodies. And so you, I think, need to decouple those two a little bit, and you always have the option of rebranding, you always have the option of relaunching, of kind of trying to reset that relationship with your users. And it's the value that you get from showing your product to a few hundred users is, in my opinion, almost always going to offset the potential of alienating or losing those 100 users. Because probably no matter how long you work on your product, if you don't get that feedback, and the longer you wait and the larger your launch, the more people at the end of the day you're going to get hating your product.
Yeah, you end up solving a problem which doesn't exist, or something like this.
Yeah, it's better to upset or alienate 100 users in order to build a product that is valuable to 10,000 users than to wait and then alienate those 10,000 users.
Right, and if people hate your product they will hate it anyway, right? So, no matter how early you launch. So if you fear of rejection, I guess you shouldn't start it.
It does very much come down to overcoming your fear of rejection and fear of people rejecting your personal product. And you have to see it instead as a professional effort, and it's commentary on the product, not commentary on yourself as a human being. Right,
so the obscurity is the friend of startups. So put it out there without any logos, just as a essentially, right? And
yeah, you don't have to tie
as a
your product name to it right
as
away.
a hack, and get feedback, iterate, and improve on top of that. You have a new service which came up in the beginning of this year, Code Year. Which was amazingly well launched by the time when people have this New Year resolutions. So you had almost 400,000 people now, right, sign up for the product, including Michael Bloomberg. Mayor of New York, and Fred Wilson, and all these people signing up, kind of willing to either learn how to program or kind of brush up their skills. They brush up the courses they took on the skills they learned in the college. So it's really exciting. What's your vision for Code Year?
The Code Year was meant to be a way to organize our content for easier consumption, a more organized consumption of the courses that we have online for users and students who have always wanted to learn how to program but who haven't been able to dedicate a large amount of time or never knew where to start. And so we were incredibly flattered by the success of the program and now see it as a way of delivering weekly content emails to help people on the path, the very long path, but the very valuable and rewarding path of learning how to program.
I mean, email is a quite many people overlook that, but email is still very, very powerful marketing tool. Everyone checks email, but people prefer writing on blogs. But there are some people, like Jason Calacanis, for example, he doesn't have a blog, but he has this newsletter, and he talks to his audience through emails. So you think that newsletters, like weekly, kind of weekly posts, weekly sharing knowledge through email is another powerful channel of
well, yes, I agree with that. I do think that blogging and posting on Twitter are very powerful ways of reaching large audiences which you maybe don't directly communicate with or directly interact with. As a broadcasting platform, they're incredibly powerful. Also, email can be somewhat restricted because you first have to have the user's email to begin with, and so it's kind of a closed conversation in that way. But it still allows you to reach a very wide audience. For many products, I think email is the core component of what makes their product engaging. And some services overlook the power of email, but if you think about it, email, I think, was a huge part of the success of Facebook and other social networks in driving engagement and actually getting users to start using their platform, because everyone has an inbox, right? And email allows you to reach into the user's private life outside of their use of the product and remind them, and of course give them the option of unsubscribing or removing themselves from that interaction if they want. But it's a very powerful way for products and applications to kind of reach into the life of the user and remind them if they want to of what's available. And so for us, it's a way to keep them motivated to move through the content and to send them these weekly reminders that they want to receive.
So Twitter and the site is for kind of bigger audience, but email is to create this intimate relationship. Very nice. You gave the talk on code reuse and using the practical use of resources today at actually in this room to Princeton students participating in the Start Week. What was the talk about? You're a technical co-founder, so I'm sure you have plenty of advice for in terms of web frameworks to use and the tools which for version control and so on. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So I was talking today about which technologies allow for the implementation of a lot of these agile development practices that have been mentioned by individuals like Eric Ries and many others. And it's important to understand how the tools should simplify and assist the development process and not get in the way. So I was talking about some of the tools that we had used to quickly iterate through our multiple products that we built during YCombinator Summer, and before that, starting with finding a hosting platform which handles a lot of the details of setting up your server and allowing for easy single command deployment. Of course, using proper source version control, especially when you're working in a team environment. The importance of web development frameworks in encapsulating a lot of the details of building a web application and providing modular implementations of common design patterns in web applications like authentication and OAuth and forums, et cetera, all of the really common features that you see on sites, comments, as well as the importance of client-side frameworks. And so all of these technologies, you want to make sure are making your job simpler, not more complicated. But once you do learn them, they can allow for a very quick implementation cycle within the idea, implementation, feedback, iteration loop that Agile development supports.
Right, and we'll probably post the tools you shared on the blog post, which will kind of follow this interview. So you mentioned Ruby on Rails and Django as a primary web framework.
Yeah.
You mentioned Git for version control. Do you agree with Vin McCanty saying that, there is this old question, what to choose, Django or Ruby on Rails? And Vin says, it doesn't matter. Just pick something you're comfortable, and depending on the language you're comfortable with, and then just go for it.
I absolutely agree that your familiarity with the language should dictate which framework you choose. And there is no, I think, one-size-fits-all framework solution.
Right.
They all have many, they have different optimizations, and they have different kind of mindsets that were used in their creation. And so it's important to understand what do some frameworks do well, what do they not do well, and to make that choice based upon primarily what language are you most comfortable with.
Right. So what I experiencing is that Rails, for example, is more about it hides quite many details.
Yes.
And Django doesn't. So that's one of the reasons why quite many developers choosing Django over Rails. But at the same time, what do we see the advantages of Rails?
Sure. So Rails, it's the famous convention over configuration, which defaults to sometimes complex conventions that are opaque or difficult for new users to the Rails framework to see and understand. Once you do come to understand those conventions, Rails can become a very quick tool to use because of its default values or conventions. So there's a steep learning curve, but it does provide a lot of default functionality, which I think you can say is correct or useful once you understand in which ways you need to override those defaults. But also the maturity of the Rails community provides many tested, deployment-ready modules and code blocks or classes, or in the case of Ruby, gems, that provide a lot of the functionality that you would expect a web application to have. And that's incredibly valuable as you're quickly iterating in your implementation cycle.
Thanks.
So
what's the technology stack of Codecademy?
Sure. It's in some ways ever evolving as we continue to modularize the application, but initially it was a Rails application built on top of Heroku, and we used underscore and backbone.js for our client-side JavaScript framework. We are moving into a Rails application which has Python modules and some Redis and Node modules for the real-time or higher frequency interactions and connectivity on the site. For our database, we use MongoDB.
Right.
And that really has been very helpful as our schema has been ever evolving. And so it can sometimes complicate the migrations that need to happen, since you don't have the rigidity of a relational database migrational structure that you have with Active Record in Rails. But for us, it's been very valuable to have that flexibility in the schema. And we're still with underscore and backbone. But one of the interesting bits of the Codecademy product is the actual evaluation engine, which runs not only JavaScript directly within your browser, but Python and Ruby. And that module is called JS REPL, which was built by our lead front-end engineer.
Very cool. What about, so if we're coming back from this technology stack conversation, what was the biggest lesson you took away from the time of running your company? And I'm sure it was
like technological insight or lesson.
It's both technological and in terms of entrepreneurial lesson, I guess. We have.
It's important to make sure that until you've hit upon a product that you're confident you're going to be built out for a long time, that you optimize for code reusability. That doesn't mean that you should spend a lot amount of time perfecting the code that you have, but as you keep building new applications on top of your existing code base, you start to see how you can abstract different functionality and build various modules which you can then recombine, because you're going to be very quickly tearing out segments of your code and replacing them, and you want to make sure that you're only tearing out the code that needs to be replaced, because any extra module implemented is time lost that can be very valuable as you're trying to ever shrink this iteration loop.
Right. Yeah, I read recently this post by Matt Mullenweg. I think he mentioned that 2006 was the like disaster year for WordPress, when they were in this one more feature kind of syndrome. Oh, let me add one more feature, and then they end up not launching anything in that year. Yeah. And what are your thoughts on this? I mean, it's
right. So with Codecademy, we don't have a formal release cycle. We do have a feature-based release cycle where we try to fix at the beginning what the feature is going to be at some level, at least in an abstract definition of its functionality, and then work to build out that on a feature branch on Git. And as soon as it's done, it's been tested, we'll merge that into master and push that to production. This allows us to kind of, if we do have another feature that we want to create in the pipeline, we'll assign it a priority, and it goes into the queue, and we can reorder that queue as we want, but we essentially pop off features as our development capability allows for. And so this, since we're not beholden to these large formal release cycles, allows us to break the release cycle pattern up into these smaller increments, which allows us to be more responsive to the feedback that we're getting from users, and how we reorganize the priorities of feature development. WordPress is an interesting example because they have an API or a contract with their developers that they have to obey, and so we have a slightly different expectation, I think, with our release cycle. So there are too many parallels there. Obviously, WordPress is a very complex product with many developers who are depending upon the consistency of their API. So we are fortunate in that we have somewhat more flexibility with our release cycle.
How does feature prioritization work at Codecademy? Do you guys list all the features you came up with, and also given within this user feedback, and then you vote and then pick the feature with the most number of votes, or focus is about saying no? How do you say no to all these features?
Yeah, that's very important, because of course if you keep saying yes to features, then you get a mess.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get a tangled mess. So first of all, I think it's important to say that everyone on the team works on product. Everyone has some background in education, someone has some background in a philosophy or an idea on how this new kind of paradigm of education should be advanced. And so we have a process in GitHub where we open proposal discussions through GitHub issues around various kind of high-level themes or products categories. And within those proposals, we start to refine what the technical specifications of the product feature is. And that then in turn starts to actually make the priority of the feature apparent, right? Because we listen very closely to feedback emails that we get. We listen very closely to conversations on Twitter, and we're fortunate in that our user base cares a lot about the product and gives us a lot of very valuable feedback that we very much respect and appreciate. And so that in turn dictates some level of priority. We have a larger roadmap or a larger kind of philosophy of where we want the product to go, and that, of course, has a very large say. But also internally, sometimes we just like to work on different things. So you'll work on one feature, you'll need to release it, let it sit for a little bit, get feedback, and while that's happening, you can work on another feature. And so once you release something, you need to give it a little bit time for the feedback portion of the iteration cycle to play its course. And then you get enough information where you have new hypotheses, and then you can revisit that product or that feature and launch the next iteration of it. A good example of that are forums that we have. Our forums that we released were very much a minimum viable product. We knew that we had users who wanted to be communicating with each other, answering and asking questions of each other, and so just very quickly, within like 1 to 2 days, we got that out the door. And it was a very simple product. And now, after about a week and a half or 2 weeks, we're revisiting it, and we'll be doing the next release cycle here in the next few days.
Very cool.
So,
in terms of things you did right, what are you fortunate about? So I guess you made many decisions, and some of them wrong, some of them were correct, and most of them were correct, obviously. What are you most glad you did, and why?
Yeah, I think sometimes lightning strikes twice.
Uh-huh.
And that's not to say it's completely unmotivated, but you're never 100% sure, right? There's no reason to be 100% sure, but I think we've done a fantastic job with capturing the spirit of individuals who've been frustrated with existing tools and have always wanted to learn how to code, who felt like this is a technology or a discipline which is reserved for these elite individuals who are in some way different from everyone else, and that's absolutely not the case. Everyone has at some capacity the level to learn how to code. And so I think we've done a really good job of tapping into that desire and making the experience as welcoming as possible. The product does certainly have it certainly can be improved in various ways to improve usability and to make that experience better. But I think we're absolutely onto the right track there. On top of that, we've been very fortunate that people have been interested in sharing this tool. And we've been able to capture some of that interest and provide them with tools to share it on Twitter or Facebook or other social network sites.
In terms of geography, I mean, if you talk about the demographics of users, what was it like? I mean, is it mostly males, or in terms of gender, in terms of geography, all those different things? What are your observations?
So we have a very diverse user group in that we are truly global. In fact, when we first launched, we were able to watch on Twitter as the sun went around the world. We also noticed that the activity went around the world from country to country, which was a phenomenal experience. That was really just quite amazing to see that happen. And to even, it's really, I think, a comment to Twitter as a platform. The fact that it enables that kind of communication and dissemination of ideas so quickly, or in 24 hours, the idea has gone around the globe and come back again. Awesome. And it's really fantastic. And you've seen that with many other events or ideas, et cetera, like with the tsunami in Japan and with earthquakes in the Middle East and elsewhere, and Haiti, of course. So we also have a larger percentage of females on our site than is common in the industry, which we've been incredibly enthusiastic about. We are trying to, at every level, break down the barriers that exist that prevent people from learning how to code. And we very much believe that one of them is some of those barriers are societal, right? And so we're trying to counteract those and make sure that we do not bias one gender over another, we do not gender one age group over another, or one ethnicity over another. We very much want to open up coding to as many people as possible.
How big is, for example, Eastern Europe? I mean, these guys love programming.
Russia and Poland, and
like Bulgaria, Hungary, Germany big.
They're large users.
Japan?
Our two largest users are the United States, just because we currently do not offer translations. But our second largest user base by country comes from Japan.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So is Bump. Japan is like true early adopters. They early adopt everything.
It was really exciting, actually, to see them adopt the product when it first launched, and it's such a fantastic feeling to know that it's catching on in another country, because it's a whole other culture, it's a whole other context, and to even think that the application could have any ground in that new culture is just fantastic.
Any plans to visit Tokyo at some point?
I'd love to. I currently don't have a ticket booked, but that would be incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Codecademy is based in New York. What can you say about New York tech scene? I mean, it's a really New York. Boston is no longer the capital of East Coast in terms of startups. I mean, we can say that.
I'm glad that's an accepted fact now.
It's accepted.
I have nothing against Boston, but of course I'm pro New York just because I'm from New York. But
what can you say about New York startups? We have Foursquare, we have Tumblr, all Etsy, all these great startups coming out in New York.
I think New York is a great place
What is it
for
about? Yeah.
a social-facing or public-facing tech company. You've seen Foursquare success, Tumblr success, Etsy success, and companies like Tenjin prove that you can also build a company that is fundamentally technical at its core.
MongoDB, right?
Yeah, of course. And Tenjin's done a fantastic job of building a dedicated technical team. From my perspective, I mean, I've never worked for them, but they have a very good reputation in New York. So I very much believe that New York is a viable place to start a company, especially if it's consumer-facing, and in some way involves the merger of technology with another vertical or domain.
Fashion, local business,
Yeah.
all those things.
And education.
Education. That's why Stanford was like trying to build this campus.
Yeah,
Right?
I think the city has done a great job of realizing some of the frustrations of that the New York City-based startups have felt as they experience the growing pains of becoming larger than any previous tech companies in recent history in New York. They've been, I think they're very conscious, and they're doing, they're working to improve a lot of those issues. The tech companies themselves in New York have done a great job of branding themselves as New York-centric companies to help change New York's reputation. The schools in New York have done a fantastic job of onboarding students into showing startups as an alternative option to consulting and finance. So I think it's a very good time to be a company in New York City.
And that's the goal of Start Week here at Princeton as well.
Yeah.
Kind of really popularize entrepreneurship as the default way. Default way of thinking when you're graduating. And I mean,
At least seeing it as a viable option.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess I'm too strong about my wording, but anyway. So, what about as a founder? I'm sure you don't have much time on reading, but what kind of blogs do you recommend for entrepreneurs and startup founders?
I can't claim that I'm an avid blog reader, although I know Joel Spolsky, of course. Cool. When I was a student, I would read his writings. I haven't been reading them recently, so I can't comment on his recent quality, but I'm sure it's very high if he's still blogging. But when I was a student, he was very active, and those were always very enjoyable to read. Of course, Fred Wilson gives a very unique and popular take on entrepreneurship. I mean, those are the two that I probably would visit the most. But
so in terms of, you mentioned Joel Spolsky, and he recently launched his service called Trello.
Yes.
And we, in our team, while we were working on our project, we actually created a kind of board on Trello, and we have this list to do, kind of Kanban kind of board, to do, in progress, done, and then just an idea. And it's really useful. You can assign tasks to different members of the team, and you kind of see at a glance what is happening at the project. What do you use for project management?
So we don't use Trello, although I think it's a fantastic tool, and I think it really reflects a lot of his insights into the software development process.
Simplicity
and
is the key.
Smaller teams organize. We currently have a very lightweight team management structure. Since we're still a very small, intimate team, we use a daily kind of Scrum-esque or Scrum-inspired email where we each say in bullet points what we're working on today, what we did yesterday, and what's blocking us from completing what we want to complete today. That's mainly for accountability and tracking purposes. Asana has been great at creating Asana for these stacks of work that need to be done that can be assigned and divvied up into these incremental units. We use GitHub, of course, for a lot of software-based tasks where we report bugs, or as I mentioned, when we have conversations around proposed product development. That all happens in GitHub issues.
Well, okay. And lastly, what is your one piece of advice to all entrepreneurs out there, as well as the vision for Codecademy?
I would say pick your team very wisely, and I think it really all comes down to the strength of the team as a unit. As the founding team and the team that you assemble very early on are what's going to drive you forward and make sure that you won't hit upon the idea right away. There will be difficulties and struggles with implementation, but if you have a solid team, there's a solid foundation for the company and for the vision going forward, that will get you very far. And it's very difficult to put together a solid team, but when you do, it is fantastic.
Thanks for coming on the program, right?
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. Thanks.